Well, I'd love to start with Ellen. I mean, it's the best place to start.
So I come to this work because I lost my mother, Ellen, in 1993. And Ellen Jane was a woman before her time. She was a copywriter, she was a wordsmith, she was a super mom, she was a fundraiser. When she and my dad decided to consciously uncouple, if you will, they remain beautiful friends. So I feel like she taught others how to even do divorce well,
Yeah.
which was really helpful to my sister and myself. She then created job share with her best friend who also was separating, and they went to get their real estate license together and became the dynamic duo.
Yeah.
It was so amazing to watch because she was first to so many things and was ballsy and was irreverent and yet was such a lady with like
Yeah.
the most beautiful manners and so elegant. And she seemed so ahead of her time, but also like an incredibly old soul.
Did she cook?
She cooked a few things really well. So there
Yeah.
was meatball night. There was mom's special spaghetti sauce. There was always the grill. There was always a flank steak on the grill with mom's
Yum.
marinade. She
Yeah.
she had some go-tos. And then as she became busier in real estate, there were like little notes of us ways that we could start the dinner, like start the stovetop stuffing. And then
Yeah.
she would always find like the fast way, but she would always find a way to like doctor it and make it very Ellen.
Yes. How did you guys spend time as a family? What are some of your memories when she was alive of your family time?
Ah, the beach, the beach, the beach, the beach. Like we grew up in the
Yeah.
near the Jersey Shore. She grew up in Deal, New Jersey, and when she had the opportunity to make our first home after she and my dad met in DC, she convinced him that we should go back to New Jersey. So our childhood, I think, probably resembled hers. And so the
Yeah.
beach was like the central character. I feel like the boardwalk and a rite of passage was definitely learning to play skee ball. It was like
Oh,
prob-
I love that.
probably my best sport, embarrassingly, and also shamefully proud of that. I think also it was adventuring. Like she also made the idea of having like 25 hours in her day compared to other families who seem to only have like 20. We were always last at the mall or out to dinner on a school night.
Yeah.
Really, I thought that was magic. That was like working mom, but I really thought it was
Yeah.
magic.
It sounds like magic.
It really was. And so if you needed like the poster board for school or you needed like green sweater for green, Green Day or some superhero something or a costume for your, play,
Yeah.
we were dashing all around and getting it all done, but it really always felt more of an adventure. And we were always on E on the gas tank. Like her her battle cry was lane forward girls, we're running on luck.
Oh, I love it. Are you like that as a mom? Have you carried on that adventurous spontaneity?
I never have gas. I never have juice on my phone. I'm always like
Yeah.
running till the bitter end of like squeezing it all in. Yes.
Yeah. And so tell me about the period in your life. How old were you and what was going on in your life when Ellen passed?
So my mom sadly died suddenly and without warning at 50. She took a day off and went to the beach
Yeah.
at Sandy Hook, which was a beautiful public beach. And she just decided that it was too hot to sell anybody a house that day.
Yeah.
I was 27. I
Mhm.
was married and living in Manhattan. And the good news is that the moment I connected with my sister, I said to her, if there was anything left that you would tell mommy, that you need to say, that you're sorry for,
Yeah.
anything at all. And I don't know what made me feel like I needed to ask her that so urgently. But we both thought about it for a minute. And every single conversation that we had with our mom ended with, I love you. And they were daily phone calls and they were the absolute minutia of knowing
Yeah.
everything about your day.
Yeah.
So there was nothing left unsaid or unspoken. It was just way too soon. Way, way
Yeah.
too soon.
Did you even understand what grief is or was at that time? Tell us about that initial, because some people listening might be either in their acute grief phase or maybe they've come through it. And I just want to understand because you have become so well versed and so grief informed, as I've heard you reference, which I love that term since then. But take us back to the raw. You're 27. You get that phone call. What happens in the next couple years after she dies?
Nobody said grief or grieving. Everybody came and paid their respects, and we had a beautiful funeral. And no one offered me any idea of doing anything past that. And so
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was a process. I didn't know that that terrible hurt, that longing, that pain that was connected to the way that I was feeling felt like I must be feeling this because I had that incredible attachment to this incredible woman. That
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there were tools that I could have that could have helped ease the pain or name what I was feeling, grief.
Yeah.
So I wasn't doing anything that was like outwardly mourning
Yeah.
past the funeral. And we know now that that's essential, that
Yes.
I didn't have anybody talking to me about like maybe you should go talk to someone, maybe there's some way in which you would like to remember her or honor her. This is going to be hard. Like I didn't hear any of that. So my knee jerk reaction was to just hunker down. I owned my own PR agency at the
Yeah.
time. We were all three, my sister, my stepfather, and I were all like, return to work. And
Wow.
I dug into work so fiercely. It just didn't even cross my mind that there was something else that I should do, but I really felt as if I was walking around with an open wound, that the world
Yes.
know that I was, like, bleeding out all over Manhattan, but it was
Yeah.
secret and quiet, and I feel so sorry for that, Barry, because
Yeah.
I wish someone had said, "Hey, this is not what you might wanna think about." So my
Yeah.
resiliency took over. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being strong, resilient, independent. But I
Yeah.
flexed that muscle so hard that I really didn't know that there was another way.
Did you have moments of breakdown, like the first, New Year's Eve without her or like, were you experiencing the what I would describe as like an influx of longing or pain around certain maybe of her birthday or her death date? Or were you not even you were just getting through life and maybe not even tuned in that way?
I think there were small moments of memorializing her on like our first Mother's Day and the first grief anniversary. And they were all out of a sense of my own um, way of memory making. I mean, it's always been a
Yeah.
part of me that my knee jerk reaction to most things is like, how do we make this some kind of memory ritual? I had that gene before, but
Yeah.
this really made it like heightened. And formally, I feel like the first time that I entertained grieving in a way that was on purpose was when I became pregnant with my first child. That
Yeah.
I realized, oh no, I'm going to be a motherless mother.
Yes. And
And
what does that mean to then be conscious? Did you read a book? Did you talk to a friend? Did you get therapy?
in 1994, Hope Edelman's book, Motherless Daughters, came out. So that was the year following my loss. And in that book were the stories of women where, consciously, of course, on the planet, there are other women who have lost their mom. But reading the book, allowed me to know
Yeah.
I wasn't alone. And a lot of those women and what they did became sort of a map for what I might do. And
Yes.
what those things as a motherless mother, which was outlined in one of the chapters of the book, was yeah, let's get on the horn with a therapist who can help you with these big feelings. Cause I was also so cognizant of making it the happiest pregnancy I could so that I felt like I
Yeah.
didn't want to pass along that bittersweet sadness
Yes.
to baby I was holding.
Yeah. And so was that your first experience with therapy?
It was.
Wow.
Yeah,
And would you describe it as a positive one?
it was so positive. It was very, I reached out to a referral. It was a gentleman. He was warm and lovely. And he said, you might want to talk to my wife. She
Yeah.
lost her mother.
Oh, wow.
And so I think so often when I work with folks or people come to me and ask me how I think the best way to be supported is to find somebody that is has experienced a personal loss. It doesn't have
Yes.
to be the same one as you, although I think motherless daughters see other motherless daughters in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
She was warm and insightful. Just knowing that she had experienced a similar loss
Yeah.
just created a camaraderie, a comfort, a trust, and a safe space for me to be the most open I had ever been with anybody about what it felt like with this hole in my heart.
Yes. I think especially when you're expecting your first child and you're a motherless daughter, there's something unique about every loss we experience, but I think in that case, there's so many references to mothers in our culture that we don't even realize. Now that I've had, dear friends lose their moms and just more tuned in to people's paths in humanity, like Mother's Day itself is a different experience because now I'm aware of how it could be specifically experienced to people who don't have that kind of connection to their mom, or maybe their mother isn't physically here, or for all the reasons. I have a lot of friends who have had experiences with fertility, and maybe they've become a mother, or maybe they never, that ship sailed. And so I always think about women and their relationship to motherhood during that period. And so I'm glad that you felt like you had some support before she arrived.
I know. And that was another gift because I was so urgently seeking that beautiful secure attachment that I had
Yeah.
lost. And it was beautiful in that I went to find out the sex of the baby, and I was so desperate for them to just put the exclamation point on the fact that
Yeah.
I already knew that I was having a daughter. Like, if there is a higher spirit, God, connection to whatever it is that I was like trying so hard to believe in after the loss of my mom, I was like, I will have a daughter. And so there she came, Emma Jane, who's named after my mom, Ellen Jane. And I just knew. And then in between my girls, I had 3 miscarriages and a lot of fertility
Mhm.
issues, and again sought support. And it also is sort of an invitation as a motherless daughter when so much of my support and guidance and nurturance came from that relationship. I had to seek outside help, and it was very hard to ask for help. So you're in this independent zone,
Yeah.
yet you're so lost. You're doing all these things for the first time. The first person that you want to call is your mom. At least
Yeah.
for me it was. It was the one person that I knew would be able to give me the kind of guidance and understanding in those really difficult moments.
Mhm.
And the OB became a place that felt like a place where I sought support and nurturance. And the way that I chose those people was really important to me.
Was there a way to choose them? Like, was there, like, magic in the air? Did you get a gut feeling when you were going to work with particular women or seek mothering from women around you?
I don't think that I named it until many, many years later, knowing that I
Yeah.
needed to be remothered. But the people that felt like warmth, it felt like a hug,
Yes.
felt like something was just right. And It opened like this chain of being able to converse, cry openly,
Yeah.
just welcome my story wholeheartedly, and being able to even say, this is going to be hard without my mom. And it was an all female practice that came highly recommended. And it just felt like they had my back in a way that I don't know that I would
Yeah.
have really needed or was seeking had I had a mom that I knew was going to show up and be like, you know,
Yeah.
literally between my legs. I think Ellen would have been there between my legs.
Oh, it sounds like it. Very modern. Like, "Let's go. I'm in the room."
She would have been the catcher. I
Yeah.
have a theory.
I love it. So tell me then or lead us through what led you to then creating these spaces for other women and really anybody to participate, in your memory circles and in conversations about grief and grief support.
I mean, it was a big winding path to get there. I had a career
Yeah.
in public relations. We up and moved from New York to Chicago, which Ellen would have been very against. It felt like my first middle finger to death and loss and
Yeah.
making a grown-up decision that she would have been really good and pissed at. But she also knew me as a writer, and I never wanted to lose my connection to that. So even though I felt really drawn to helping others and kept meeting motherless daughters and eking out a little more confidence and curiosity about talking about mother loss, I
Yeah.
didn't dip into the work for a really long time. So I was a
Yeah.
reporter at the Chicago Tribune, and I was a reporter at Chicago Magazine, and I had all of these ways in which I connected to folks in my writing, about different businesses around,
Yeah.
Chicago. And in doing so, kept meeting someone who had experienced loss. And I realized that I
Yeah.
had this enormous capacity to take in their story, that
Yeah.
it was kindred and feeling that connection. And I couldn't really name it. But suddenly I felt like there needed to be more somehow. So, in the course of doing a yoga teacher training that was like a 200-hour teacher training at my local studio, just for me, just for
Yeah.
deepening my practice, it asked if there was like some project that you would like to do that served your highest and best self as a new yogi. And
Yeah.
I said it was to sit shoulder to shoulder in circle with others who had experienced loss of any kind.
Mm. And you wrote that out like with a longhand in a notebook. Okay, I love
Wrote it
that.
out. Yep, it was what came through, and in no time, one of my teachers who I knew had also experienced loss, my dear friend Amy Owen, and I co-created a class. We made it on the day before Mother's Day. We called it like Taking Back the Night. So as difficult as Mother's Day had been in the past for both
Yeah.
of us, we thought if we have this on the Saturday before, we
Yeah.
can do some movement, some somatic healing. We'll take all the writing skills that Barry has and we'll move
Yeah.
it into some journal prompts, and we will create a circle that would have been like nurturing to us because Amy had also lost her mother Marble. And so we invoked Ellen and Marble, and we
Yeah.
did all these women in the room. And what we heard when everybody left was, this was so amazing. There's nowhere to go for this. I'm so glad
Yeah.
you created this. When are you doing it again?
Oh, that's so beautiful. How old were your girls when you were doing the yoga certification?
Quinny was Quinny was real little. Like I moved to Chicago, back and forth, New York, Chicago, like in '03. Must have been around '03, '04. So she
Yeah.
was a newborn, tiny, tiny. Yeah, really little. I can't even think about trying to think of her in like the mix of all of it.
Yeah.
Tiny. Yeah, Emma must have been in grade school. And one of the things about school that was so interesting is that I thought everybody deserves to have yoga in their life. And as part of my training, I did like a certification with children so that I could teach it in the Chicago public schools. Maybe she was bigger, Paige. Maybe
Yeah.
she was like 5. Maybe it was both girls were at this amazing progressive public school. And It must have been. I must have been doing yoga then and part of the yoga community in Chicago, but it was when Quinny was probably in the pre-K program or something that I just thought every time I would come to my mat, I would say, everybody deserves this.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm asking is because I know there are 2 things. A lot of parents listen to this podcast, and a lot of women listen to this podcast who are navigating their career paths, and maybe men too. I just hear from the women more. And I feel like in my conversations that I'm having with these people, sometimes they'll think they're behind the 8 ball or I should have figured this out by now or the and when I know your work, I love hearing your story in this way. And I think it's so important for people to hear that the seeds of what your life's work is, your vocation, your calling, which I believe this grief work is your calling. That's how I've experienced you in this space. It's seated, it's there, so I wanted to take my listener back and let them imagine your lifeline. Like, this has been in the works. You and the way that you now do and, facilitate Memory Circle, which I want you to talk about, but it's all these different interests that you have, and they've all been seated, and they all come together in this very unique, original experience that you're offering people. And I think that's true for all of our lives. The future is in the seeds. We're always growing towards what I think is our true expression if we're paying attention. And it sounds like you were really starting to pay attention.
I went many, many years in. I went to a shaman and she said, you need to collaborate. And
Yeah.
I had always told myself the story that my mother would be good and pissed if I in any way defined my life by my loss. And
Yeah.
this woman basically said to me, "Oh, she's on board everything you've been doing up until now." And so it kind of felt like the PR department, the marketing department, the writing, the
Yes.
lists, the people you
Yep.
meet. It felt like every step was leading to that, right up to the yoga training. And I thought my mom would like be making such fun. Like she had this like woo daughter and
Yeah.
um I but the truth is that she used to see a friend who would read her and tell her if it was a good day or not a good day to sell a house. So she really was attached. It was that I was worried that the me that she knew that would be lost, that our
Yeah.
connection would be lost. But this shaman said to me, "Oh no, you have to learn to collaborate." So the memory circle was really born of the drive home that day when I thought, what does
Mhm.
collaboration look like? What does it feel like? Because the work that I was doing at the yoga studio was very unofficial. I was still gainfully employed as full-time stylist with, folks like Crate and Barrel and designers and all of this. And I reached out to a friend that had like one of the earliest podcasts. Her name is Lena Brower, and she has a podcast called Practice You that is so aligned with your work page. You would adore her.
Yes.
And she had a very comprehensive intake form. And the last line on the form said, "Is there anything else that you wish us to promote?" And out of my fingers on the keys came the memory circle like magic. It
So
was
cool.
not searched, never thought
Yeah.
of it. I yelled to my girls. I was like, "Somebody go on GoDaddy and see if it's available
Yeah.
for .com." And like, you know,
Somebody techie, somebody young and techie, go in there and Google it.
"Go figure this out for mom." And like, it was free and clear on all the sites, which is really a
Yeah.
marvel. No weird spellings and no,
Yes.
no strange extensions. And it just felt easy, smooth, and
Yeah.
almost fun.
Yes. I think that's a real measure of where we're supposed to go with our lives, and I think it's one of the pieces of criteria that we often overlook because it's so natural and fun that you're like, "Oh, this couldn't be valuable." People couldn't wanna do writing prompts with me. I'm thinking about your work and how you've managed to weave in your connection to poetry and writing, and I love that about your work. So let's get into that. So tell me a little bit more about how you landed, and did you initially go more the yoga route? And was it yoga and grief work, or do you feel like there was always a piece that was about writing and accessing your inner world through these writing prompts?
I just thought, how can I make it my own? And how can I take the skills that I know and help folks process grief in the way
Yeah.
that I knew it? And that was all pre-training. Then I thought, if
Yes.
I'm going to get real about this, then I want to become certified. And so I did coursework with Dora Carpenter, Hope Edelman, Claire Bidwell Smith, David Kessler, like all the biggest names in the space. I was like, I want to learn from them. I want to feel like do no harm, know as much as you
Yeah.
can, entertain still to this day, continuing going to school. I do more continuing education in the space than you can imagine as a non therapist. So I am
Yeah.
a grief specialist, but not a therapist. So I'm always eager to create forward movement through whatever modality, whatever you can put in your toolkit so that
Mhm.
processing grief feels right to you, that there are no rules, that there is no one way. There is only that we learn to live with loss and that in some way we are moving forward.
Yes. And through all your training, Barry, and in your personal life, because I know that you've gone through other losses since your mom died, how have you changed in how you experience your own grief and how do you move through I'm always curious about that, it's like we come here to teach what we're here to learn,
Mm.
so how do you apply all these beautiful lessons that you're teaching us and holding space for us, but how does that apply to your own life and what has have you found most helpful?
I have learned to trust my intuition and curiosity in
Yeah.
exploring anything next and new and interesting. And like I said, the memory making piece felt very comfortable to me. So I'm the girl who engraves things. I'm the girl who collects things that feel like n- they have meaning in and around my home. I took my mother's fur coat and made pillows.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
any way I can incorporate and create a continuing bond with my mother and nurture my relationship with her, even across the veil, feels like
Yes.
it has guided my work. And I don't know that I always believed that I could, but I think in my work, I realized how essential that was in my learnings. Keeping her alive means keeping her alive in ways that feel right to me, that feel on purpose to me. And so on her birthday, I always buy something at discount to honor the idea that she was like the queen of discount shopping, like an Olympian.
Yeah.
And I frame tidbits of my children's writing and I lean so into meaning making in my life and memory making in my life that even taking her purse to the theater and keeping all the
Yeah.
theater tickets of all the shows that she didn't get to
Yes.
see. There's such aliveness in that. I write to her, I write about her a great deal, but I
Yeah.
also write to her. And there's such good science now about how the cells in our body don't know whether a person is earthly or otherwise. So imagine making that gorgeous cellular connection to our loved ones by writing to them.
Yes.
When we write to them by hand, we use a part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex that responds in healing. So I always say to folks, like, just imagine that it's a healing process in addition to connection. And just try it
Yes.
on and see how it feels. And if that feels totally weird to you, then
Yeah.
don't do it.
Yes, and I think people are so afraid, like, "What do I do with the letter?" Or what I always tell people, "You can burn it, you can shred it." Like, you don't have to keep it, but I letter writing for me in my life personally and just when I'm helping other people with their lives, it is the best tool. It's inexpensive, you can do it anytime, you can do it anywhere, you have a writing utensil, and I also think it's so important to note, dealing with loss of a relationship or loss of a job or loss of a lover, loss of a friend. It to speak to that person, in a way and share what you're dealing with and share with that person, it immediately moves the energy. It immediately moves the longing or the resentment or whatever you're feeling. It's a beautiful tool. So I'm so glad you're telling our listeners about that. It's really important.
There's a chapter actually in Claire Bidwell Smith's book, and she talks about anxiety being like one of the things in grief that we don't really talk about a lot. And a
Yeah.
gentleman shows up to her practice and he's having anxiety, and he can't even name these panic attacks as he's having as having any relation to grief at all. But he says his dad dies and he has this incredible longing to tell him something. And she says, write to him,
Yeah.
write to him.
Yeah.
And I read the book as part of training. And so I did the exercise. And what it
Yeah.
helped me to create was to invite my mom in. So let's say I was going to my daughter's college graduation, instead of it being like another moment that my mother was missing, even though she wasn't there. And of course, it would be much better if she were in person. I would invite her in. Dear mom, if you could see Emma,
Yeah.
she's graduating cum laude today, and blah, 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 blah. Blah. And I invited
Mm.
her in, and it was so soul soothing. It was such beautiful connectivity. Again, it's not your person. I'm not bright siding letter writing
Yeah.
as a substitute in any way, shape, or form. But when you feel how calming, how connective, how wonderful it was to invite her in, it feels more like a calling in than a missing
Yes.
out. And
Yes.
more I could do that, the more I felt like my life was still so full and she was
Yes.
so proud. And as I wrote those moments, I realized also what they meant to me.
Yes. It's like you live them double. You double down on the meaning and the memory making.
And it made me slow down and take in the big moments in my life too, in a way that I was sharing it with her, but I was also almost like a meditation, everything just like slowing down and really taking in those moments.
Yeah.
But as you said, it could also be to get quiet and get meditative and maybe light a candle and ask for her advice. Like try to channel her
Yeah.
advice through my intuition. Like, what would mom say? This is this really difficult situation. And what might her advice be? And maybe it was like about moving house or like some real estate question. You can hear her voice and like getting ready for a big event, like more blush, more
Yeah.
blush.
Put on a little dash of lipstick. It's so sweet. I love that. How do you feel about signs? It's kind of along the same line of calling in your loved one who's passed. And in your memory circles, have you heard people's accounts of feeling like they're getting some sort of communication or affirmation from their loved one? And how do
I
you feel about it in your
Yeah,
life? Yeah.
I write about mine all the time. I mean, I have seen ladybugs since shortly after I lost my mom. The first time we gathered with all the grandkids back in New Jersey, we were on like our old Highway 35 where we grew up, and we stopped at Cold at Carvel in the middle of winter. We saw that it was open, and it was my mom's favorite. On any given day, you could
Yeah.
see her car in the parking lot.
Mm.
And we ordered the vanilla cone, like the Grandma Ellen cone.
Yeah.
We call her Grandma Ellen, even though she never knew any of her grandkids.
I
And we're
love
on
that.
such a good time that all the windows fogged. And so we opened the window and this ladybug flew in and she just wouldn't leave. Like we drove away on the highway after everybody had enjoyed their cones and she was still with us and still with us until we were like laughing. And at some point, she must have flown out. But a ladybug would continue to visit on big occasions, ski trips. I mean,
Yeah.
there was no mistaking that this was like Ellen was not missing these family adventures
Yes.
or highlighted days on the calendar. And also, the first building that we moved to in Chicago for work, the work building was 444 North Michigan. And I have seen 444 nearly daily to the point now that I've shared, even clients send me their 444 sightings because they think it's
Yeah.
me too, even what they see. So I feel like
Yes.
that happens. And I always bring in a medium into my grief groups at some point along the way to talk about how we can invite in signs, how we can
Yeah.
talk about connecting across the veil, trusting our own intuition, tapping our own intuition, and if it feel good to see what it's like to call in, trusted mediums and see if you can connect with your loved one.
Yeah. And in my experience of calling in a sign or just believing in a sign, it's also an active choice to affirm that you got the sign. That's your choice. And so I always tell people it's like, why not believe? You get to believe, you know, and so practice and play, like, it can be very playful, and it can really help you feel like you're not alone in this and that there's hope. You know, that's the thing. It can feel that void in our hearts, those holes in our hearts can feel hopeless at times. And then it's like, well, life is all connected in a mystical and mysterious way that we don't know. And that can be okay and even beautiful. But we have to decide to engage those ideas.
And if you are someone who maybe didn't have a big belief before your loved one passed, you
Yeah.
have to ask them for a sign. They may be afraid to frighten you. And so, everybody that I've ever worked with always says, ask for a very specific sign and call it in and say
Hmm.
that you want it and that you wish to connect this way. And as soon as
Yeah.
they've done that, they've seen all kinds of signs, synchronicities, things that they
Yeah.
also feel could only be for them, like calling in at a sign the night before and then going into the bathroom and getting ready for a big event. And there's like a disco of flickering lights in in the bathroom
Yeah.
as they're trying to get ready. Big electrical things, hummingbirds, um, nature,
Hmm.
all kinds of bugs, cardinals, you know, everybody has something different that they wish to see. And also, if there's something that shows up that seems curious, I always say, look up the meaning. If, like, in a week you keep getting like the same number
Yeah.
reoccurring, or, all of a sudden you keep noticing a similar flower, or you find a 4-leaf clover, or like you're just curious about something. I always say, like, get even more curious and see what else
Yes.
to tell you.
Yes. I have to share this, sign that I got from my father-in-law. Boyd's dad passed suddenly at age 68, and I think Boyd was just about 40, and I was close with him because Boyd and I met in college, and his name is Richard, and he and I both loved work. He had left his, big, long banking kinda job, and he had started a jazz music label that he was very passionate about. So I loved that, talking about the musicians, and I just love work. And he was always very encouraging of my writing and me starting my own business one day. So at the time I was teaching and we would have these great conversations about passion and vocation and so I'm going to give a talk in New Orleans and all my mom and her friends are going to be there. It's at a country club and it's for a nonprofit that is about organ donation. And when Richard had passed, he was able to be an organ donor, and his kidney went to a mother in the Midwest. I can't remember where she lives, and it saved her life, and she had 2 small children. And this woman had written Boyd and his 2 younger brothers a thank you note. So in this talk, which I'd never given before, plus I felt it's interesting when you have your own business. I don't know if you experienced this too. When you're first coming out to your friends and family, it's like, what are they going to think, that I'm talking about these things? And it's not like my life is perfect. And yet here I am, a life coach, talking about living what matters and living with intention. So I felt a little vulnerable in front of this group of women. And I'm walking into the country club and I'm gonna give my talk, and I'm going to end by sharing with the group this letter, this thank you note that was sent to Boyd and his brothers and kind of tie it all together. And the one sign that I had said I would like to receive from Richard was when he died, and he died suddenly, we were all in his workspace cleaning it out, and he had this huge tub of paper clips. And I always felt particularly bonded with him, as I said, overworking, but we were both Capricorns and just in his being in his workspace. I was always kind of where I interacted with him. So I had said out loud with my hand on my heart, "Hey, if you ever want to give me a sign, let it be a paperclip." So as I'm walking in, I've got my little outfit on. I'd actually gotten my hair done, which I never, ever, ever do, and I had navy blue on and I had lipstick on. I was really nervous. And I said, I'd like a sign. I'm about to go in there. And I literally looked down, Barry, and there's a paper clip, like right in front of my shoe, like as I'm walking into the country club, just right there on the front porch in New Orleans. It was so, so beautiful. So I'm sure you hear other stories like that in the memory circle, but it's so, encouraging just to believe, it feels like, "Oh, I who knows?" It's God, it's Richard, it's life, it's just a paperclip that fell out of someone's bag. I mean, all of the above, but just to believe that it's okay and we're not
I
alone and we're together.
I went on such a search for meaning, like, how can a woman who is such an extraordinary mother and such an incredible fundraiser and gives back so much to the world, like, how could I have a belief in anything greater than us? This woman was plucked one day at
Yeah.
50, and she too wanted to be an organ donor, which our family discussed when I lost my grandmother. And she said, my grandmother sadly passed of emphysema. And my mom said, if I can in any way
Yeah.
help for the research of emphysema. So we met with my stepfather around the holidays, and it was miserable because she passed in summer and it was like our first big holiday together. And we met in Manhattan,
Yeah.
and we were leaving and all parting on the sidewalk. And he said, I debated whether or not to tell you girls, but they couldn't donate mommy's organs because they found early stage liver cancer.
Oh, wow. How did you respond to that?
Well, I just said, I can't believe you weren't thinking of not telling us. Like, he hesitated
Yeah.
whether or not to share. And I had been so searching for the why.
Yes.
And to me, that was the greatest ever why. Like, there were so many things that I had searched for recreating her last day. Like,
Yeah.
she had a receipt in her beach bag for 3 pounds of her favorite Santa Rosa plums. And
Yeah.
there was such joy in knowing she was at her favorite place on earth and just fell asleep in a beach chair, that if someone had given
Yeah.
her a choice, that might have been it. But even more so, knowing that the other choice that she might have
Yeah.
been in was to have a long and painful experience with cancer. I think if someone had said to Ellen, you can have this or you can have this, she might
Yes.
have chosen the day at the beach. And so
Yes.
there was such comfort in that. And I think when we don't have those kind of discussions, open discussions with our family about what we choose for our own end of life, and it's so urgently important for us to have
Yes.
those, not just so that your family knows your wishes and those are made very clear, but when we do speak about what it looks like for us to have lived for a well lived life and to die well,
Yes.
kind of naming those things and then living into them backwards, you know? So if
Yes.
a family dinner is really important to you, but you're not having family dinners, if you value,
Yeah.
yeah, if you value being, charitable, but you're not doing any, giving back, it's like when you really sit down to think about how you wish to be remembered ethically, like not who gets my pearls, but who gets my
Yeah.
pearls of wisdom and how I
Yes.
lived my best life, you then write them down, you speak about them. Like those are the discussions that we should be having at Thanksgiving and on birthdays.
Yeah.
Um, Not just waiting until somebody dies to also tell them exactly how much you love them. And so
Yeah.
I just think these are the discussions that we need to be having so that we're also not curious about what our loved ones may or may not have wanted in the end. Um,
Yeah.
I'm now uh, in a lot of anticipatory grief because my dad, Neil, a very, famous and wise ad guy in his day, a madman, if you will, suffers from memory issues. And I'm so grateful that we had a conversation with him that was really difficult before we really knew where this was going and how quickly it was going, what his wishes were. And we know
Yeah.
them clearly and without hesitation. And so now we feel like we're moving forward with him so deeply here in our
Yeah.
hearts and in every decision that we're making. And that really helps us to be in the grief of losing him, right? He's alive and very much before us, but we're losing every day. And it will be hard when he's gone, but not having to guess or hope
Yeah.
that we're making the right
Yes.
decisions, but that knowing takes all of that off the table. And I can
Yeah.
be very much in the presence of loving what's left.
Did you all write it down? Did you have, like, a conversation where you wrote or he wrote it down? Yeah, so it was very intentional,
Yes.
the 3
I
of you
want
with
to
them.
know also just in the choices about how long did he wanna live in his home?
I see.
Did he want caretaking there? Did he
Yeah,
want one of us to move in with him? Did he, what felt best? We talked around it all. And he's very easy and laid back and
yeah,
his Midwestern was showing and
yeah,
he just wanted it to be easy for all of us. And I could tell it was a difficult conversation for him, but he had also lost his mom in the same way. And I think watching the way that he had to deal with that, I learned a great lesson in wanting to know from him while he still could tell us exactly what his wishes were. And it was
yeah,
difficult, but now it feels like freedom and love. And I can just soak
yeah,
up, like I said, loving what's left is so much easier when I know that we are carrying out his wishes
yeah,
without a question.
absolutely. It's like talking about dying and being very aware of your death is exactly what infuses your life with living. You know, I think it's the people have this idea like, "Oh, I don't wanna talk about that, that's morbid," or, "I don't know if I can talk about that, I'll have too many feelings." But you're gonna have double the amount of confusing feelings if you don't confront it, and the truth does set you free. I've walked side by side with people who have had those conversations, and it's liberating. It's so, so important.
I say the same exact thing having been through a divorce. I say the same exact thing about marriage. I say, maybe while everybody is very much alive, happy,
Yeah,
loving before you walk down the aisle, not even a prenup. How would you want
yeah,
this to end if we ended it beautifully? What would a
yeah,
beautiful ending look like?
yeah,
And I did that with my second marriage. I
yeah,
did that and they're really difficult conversations to have. I'm not saying they're easy, but I
yeah,
think they're as essential as any other conversation that we have about our wishes, our needs. I think it deepens the connection when we know,
for
or
sure.
even in a partnership, how does my husband wish to die? Not just what's in his will and how we're separating the money, but do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Who do
Yeah,
you want to speak? Do you want to write your eulogy? Let's write an obit. Let's sit down and
yeah,
write it. Maybe we'll write an ethical will. I think if we bring this into the daily vernacular, just as I hope we can like call into
yeah,
work and say, not going to be in today. I know it's been 3 years since my mom died, but it's her death anniversary and it's really greasy. And we're calling
yeah,
it a day that we can take off like the common cold. Like that is
yeah,
this desire.
yes. Barry, what do I do with my journals? It's the only thing I don't know what to do with. I have a lot of ideas about my perfect death. I wanna die outside, I wanna die with my dogs, but what do I do with my journals? Do people worry about this?
Every day. I mean, one
I
of the
mean, this closet right behind me, I know most people are gonna be listening to us. If you see us on YouTube, I am always sitting in front of my closet, which literally has 200 journals in it, and Boyd is like, "I am not going in there."
burn the journals, burn the journals. I say make a bonfire. Like that
That's
is
what I'll do. Okay.
those are not the notes for, like, the unwritten memoir, because as a,
Yeah.
artist way practitioner, most of mine are morning pages, and they are
Yes.
not read by me and not really meant to be read by anybody else. If you do have some that you never want anybody to see, you have to put a trusted person in charge, that the
Yeah.
first thing they do upon your death is gather up the journals and they are in charge and they are meant to do whatever it is that you leave them to do with them. And if destroy them is your wish, you need to
Yeah.
you need to name somebody.
I know, I've been thinking about that. This is good we're talking about this for other listeners who have things like their laptop. I read this because I'm grief adjacent. You know, I'm not in the grief counseling space, but I get so interested in this because to me, it has everything to do with living. And I've read before that one of the number one worries with people who are helping other people at the end of the life is the laptop. You know, who's going to see what I've been searching on the internet? Who's going to see my documents? And I'm thinking, who's going to read my journals?
And your phone, also the phone. I mean,
Yeah.
words, all of these things, like
Yeah,
live for good and
important.
well. My husband bugs me all the time. He uses like one of those things that we keep all the passwords and all the whatever. I have
Yes,
like an old school if I should die file.
I love it. Yeah, same.
Every time I leave on vacation, I always say, it's in the file. There are letters in there. I write
Yeah,
every New Year's Eve, I write a letter to my girls. All of those are in there.
yeah. Well, once you've been through it, what you've been through and what Boyd has been through with losing a parent, literally 1 minute she's there and the next minute she's not. Same with Boyd's dad, who also died in a place he loves. He died in a jazz club with music around him and with friends around him. Once you go through that, I just think it changes your perspective. I mean, we got home from, Boyd's dad's celebration of life, and we were super organized, like, told each other the passwords, looked at all the documents, cleaned things out, because you just don't wanna leave your loved ones with a mess.
Yeah.
It's so important.
You can help folks uncomplicate the very
Yeah,
complicated business of grieving if you do make those plans. I hear
yeah,
so many people that struggle when they don't have any end of life documents, paperwork, where you're trying to make sense of cobbling the life back together when you really just need space for grief.
yes, absolutely. I wanna make sure we talk about this important part of grief, which is the grieving. And I know you support people, and this comes up in the memory circle. I hear this from a lot of people. What do I say to my sister who's grieving differently from me, or from the way I am? Or what do I say to my friend who just received a cancer diagnosis? Like how to go about supporting people in addition to supporting ourselves, but really these kind of social implications around grieving and how to hold space for others. Can you share some of your guidance with us?
Yeah, my greatest guidance is show up as your most authentic self. So I say the cook cooks, right? You don't
Yeah.
want me to cook for you, but
Yeah.
you're the one that can sit with you in the muck. So you'll find the listener, the
Yeah.
cook, show up as your most authentic self. So if you are not someone that would be showing up for a dinner party and they count on you, for the dish, like in the living, what were you to that person?
Yeah.
Also, just know that no two people, even in the same family, grieve the same way. So some people may have a very outward way of grieving, which would look like crying, and then some others can't even find tears. Both are exactly okay and right for that person.
Yeah.
Unless you feel after, many years that you are still can't make sense of the loss, are still wondering if they're coming back through the door, unless you have very complicated and prolonged grief and really need to talk to somebody. I think what's normal is the way that you grieve. I always like to say to folks, tell me a story. I open up a conversation about their person. Let's say they've
Yeah.
gotten a terrible diagnosis. I always say, tell me if you're afraid. Tell me what
Yeah.
tell me what this feels like for you. But I'm the
Mhm.
talker and the listener, and so that's how I show up, and that's how I've always showed up. Sometimes it's just dropping off a meaningful book of poetry, right? Something
Yes.
really dear to you that you may pass along with a little note on the inside. If it's very hard for you to speak what you'd like to
Yeah.
say, maybe you can find someone else's words to say what it is that you'd like to convey. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's dropping off something meaningful. Like sometimes you can share a little, like we gave my mom shoes to, she had a really tiny foot and we passed them
Yeah.
along to a dear childhood friend of my sister's. Sometimes it's like
Yeah.
in- spreading it around and imparting the beauty of what remains. I think there are so very many ways now. It's just that we don't want to ignore it. People say, I didn't know what to say, so I said no.
Yeah.
That would be the only unacceptable thing, in my humble opinion, to do is to show up and
Yeah.
not say anything. Even if you think you don't necessarily belong at a memorial, like sometimes people are like, well, I didn't get invited. Sometimes we're waiting for the invitation
Yeah.
called in to help. I think just show up, show up, show up.
Yes. I had a good friend tell me, "You will never regret going to a funeral," and I've used that line when I can get to a funeral, I get to the funeral if there's a way for me to go, and I think it's so true. People always remember who showed up.
I agree. And to show up, that the greatest gift you can do is also jot down the day maybe that they got their diagnosis, maybe jot down the
Yeah.
day that their loved one passed away and put it on your own calendar so that you can check in with them and just say, I know this week ahead is going to be difficult. Also drop
Yeah.
things off just on the porch. Like, you don't need to come out, but I just dropped off a big thing of paper towels and some toilet paper. I know
Yeah.
it's full of company, so I'm just dropping it off. No need to, just checking in, just showing up in a way, again, in a way that, like, if you're great at organizing, if you're the errand, queen of erranding, if you are really good at tech support, if you are really good at accounting, like, you'll find a way
Yeah.
to show up in that person's life as your most authentic and truest self.
I love that. So I know because I've participated in a couple of your groups that you facilitated that you weave in poetry and you often weave in writing prompts. So I would love for you to read to us some poetry. But before we do that, will you tell the listeners how you came to that and why writing and journaling? You mentioned the artist way earlier. Maybe share with people because that's something I know we talked about the letter writing, but I think journal or the artist way or your relationship with that can help people to understand how practical that is and how powerful that is. Talk to us about that, and then I'd love for you to read some poetry.
It was very natural to me to write about my mom, but it wasn't necessarily natural for me to write to her. And so when I started to explore that, I found this incredible relationship with her personally. But that
Yeah.
all came as part of my training, which was so interesting. Um,
Yes.
then I started to become super interested in the science. And when I flipped the lid on that and how that
Yes.
craft movement. So when we see the writing on the outside of us, physically, it feels as if you could almost sit down next to your grief. When you physically see it outside of yourself, you can
Yeah.
almost feel as if you've moved something through you, which I think is profound. I think also in the first year of grief, it can be so difficult to concentrate. And I always found that poetry was like this beautiful balm and salve and such a bite sized way of keeping beautiful words around you. And you can, wait to read that great book on grief and the how to of grief.
Yeah.
Like, they'll be there. They'll be there on the other side. But I always found like it was really like a whole story in like a really bite-sized way of
Yes.
and the beauty. And it could be for some that it's music. I tell folks maybe music moves you and you can make a griefy playlist and you
Yeah.
sit down with some of the songs that help you bring your grief up, like really making an appointment with grief tending and really showing up for your grief in a way that feels on purpose to you. So we do all these things in my grief groups to just experiment and see, how do I feel when I write? And
Yeah.
same with morning pages. I feel like that's the clearing of the day. So you wake up in the morning and you write 3 longhand pages upon waking. There's Jungian theory that says our ego wakes like 30 to 40 minutes after we wake. So imagine without
Yeah.
judgment and without some, internal critic talking about the way that you're writing, just being able to just write out whatever it is, all the complaining, all the inquisition, all the moaning and groaning and like, this is real crap and shit.
Yeah.
Then you see it out on the page, and I think, gosh, that's the Windex of the day. We've done all of that clearing, and then we can
Yeah.
walk out into our day with a little more clarity and a little more of like all that was in us, that silt um,
Yes.
that is
So
there.
good.
Yeah, that you can like dredge it up, throw it on the
Yeah.
page, and leave the house without it inside
Yes.
your body.
Yeah.
And then
It's
I
so
think
true.
the more we do that, the more we realize that we need anything that helps us in seeking movement. The reason that I started to incorporate also the reading of poetry to others is because I think it's like a wink and a nod to mothering and nurturance that I ask folks to
Yeah.
close their eyes and invite them to be read to. And I don't think there's really anything more beautiful.
No.
And
No.
if I'm not around or Paige is not around to read you a poem, if you go
Yeah.
like poetry.org or any of those, there are like buttons you can press and have like the poet
Yeah.
himself, many living and some in the past that have recorded their poetry for posterity, that you can just have a poem wash over you and use a line or a word or even the feeling that you have as your very own prompt for writing.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. I love that. So much of what I turn to, I had learned at a as a preschool teacher. And one of my favorite things to do when I was teaching preschool, which was not even a job I wanted, what just worked for the family, but to read to children and to observe how children receive story and poetry, they just we are meant to receive the voice of another, the story of another. We're meant to move at a slower pace and be connected to creativity. And I think in our modern day world, when you're trying to grieve and you have a full time job and you're a parent or whatever you're going through, I think grief requires a different pace. And so, like you said, either creative writing or maybe it's dance, maybe it's yoga. I know when Boyd lost his dad, he would drive around a lot. For him, of course, music, he's a musician. You physically have to engage life in a different way to move through the world without the person. You know, the person is no longer in the world and you have to make sense of that somehow.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that it's in our nature to go search for them. So, in that search for them
Mm,
and that longing for them, how can you bring them back? How can you bring them in? Is it their favorite recipe? Is it their favorite piece of music? Is it doing the thing that they love, or just being with their memory in a way that feels like you're creating connectivity? And like you said, for some, that's dance where you feel that aliveness. Sometimes it's tap
yeah.
to your own mortality, but really also when you talked about being in community, we don't live so close anymore to a whole circle of those that might know us, where we used
Yes.
to live in these communities where everybody would know, that so and so at the, campfire has lost a
Yeah.
member, or even the idea that you would be in a religious community where when you were at a memorial service and you rise and the entire synagogue or church can see that you are the family that needs
Yeah.
their support, finding ways to be witnessed. So utterly important. And so that's really where the group work comes in for me, because I think when we're in circle, and I always say it's a wisdom circle and a wisdom exchange, because you'll
Yeah.
say something to me, Paige, and I will know that I'm not alone in my thinking,
Yeah.
or you'll impart some wisdom or words of advice or a way that you're healing, and I'll hear that, and it will be an invitation for me to try that on. And
Yeah.
that exchange is exactly where the sitting shoulder to shoulder with others who
Yeah.
plus, like, that is what I always imagined, that there was, like, my favorite place on earth was summer camp, and my mother went to my summer camp, and we have so much of that history in our bones, and so I
Yeah.
think when I imagine that shoulder to shoulder spirit, it was with, like, my childhood campfire at the center of the core, and that
Yeah.
we would read story, and we would sing songs, and we would that history was all incorporated. And so it also is a way of doing that. That being read,
Yeah.
I can envision you reading to the littles.
That
And in
was
the
the
same
best.
way, I feel like that's what we do in
Yeah.
circle when I bring forward a piece of writing or something that's going on in the world, and we bring that up and we have a chat about it. We create that connective tissue that's often missing in our day to day.
It's so beautiful, Barry. Just shoulder to shoulder is such a powerful it's so you, and it's such a powerful image. I'm gonna sit back and close my eyes. Will
As
you
you
read to
should.
us?
As you should.
Oh,
Yes.
good.
Yes. Okay, so this is a favorite by author Jane Kenyon, and it's called Otherwise.
Okay.
I got out of bed on two strong legs. It might have been otherwise. I ate cereal, sweet milk, ripe, flawless peach. it might have been otherwise. I took the dog uphill to the birchwood. All morning, I did the work I love. At noon, I lay down with my mate. It might have been otherwise. We ate dinner together at a table with silver candlesticks. It might have been otherwise. I slept in a bed in a room with paintings on the walls and planned another day, just like this day. But one day I know it will be otherwise.
I've heard you read it before, and every time you read it, it really gets me. I think a lot about gratitude. I feel very, I think gratitude is just one of those powerhouse virtues. It's the mother of the virtues. If you can practice gratitude, the other things can fall into place. And I love that reading so much because whenever I feel overwhelmed with gratitude, this word otherwise is the
Hmm.
perfect way to capture really feeling what you went through, like really having to your what you would say a memory, making a memory. And we could be doing something else right now, but we got to have this conversation. And we a thousand things had to happen for us to have this conversation and for it to sound good, which it did.
Oh,
And I just think, I'm very grateful and I'm very aware that it could have been otherwise. So it's a
it's such
beautiful
a
reading.
yeah, it always reminds me to take notice of not just the mundanity and how even in the
Yeah,
smallest things that we would treasure of just the ordinary day, the one more time to just be ordinary is so extraordinary
yeah,
that knowing that it might be otherwise, as you said, is always a reminder to me. And we use that as a reading and a prompt. And so if listeners feel called to do so, I
yeah,
would say use the line, it might have been otherwise, and just riff on that and see what
yeah.
comes.
I love that. Thank you so much, Barry. What a treat to get you. Thank you so, so much.
Oh, I'm so happy to be with you. And I hope that it will be otherwise and in person next time.
That's right. It will be. And we will let everybody know how to find you. So, everybody, please check out the show notes. I'm going to give you all sorts of links and ways to reach out to Barry. She's always hosting events in person on the East Coast, oftentimes, and virtually. And we will give you ways to sign up for those events and be a part of the memory circle.